You are Locked On Seminoles, your daily podcast on the Florida State Seminoles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome back to another edition of Locked On Seminoles. What's up, everybody? It's your boy Drake here, and unfortunately, we have our last Know Your Foe segment of the season, but today we have two very special guests. We have Mr. Josh Helmer and John Williams of the Locked On Seminoles podcast. Fellas, how are we doing today?
Doing great. Excited for one more football game. Sad that we only have one more football game. It's been a whirlwind of a season, not gone as we would have liked, but still, football's football. And when it's over, we'll be crying about it and really not wanting to wait the 9 months it's going to take to get football back.
Doing great. Happy to be with you. Obviously, looking forward to this bowl game. One final game for each of these two teams with obviously, not a national championship on the line as we've seen in the past between these two, but a lot on the line, I think, for Florida State for what their hopes are for next season and for Oklahoma to try to salvage a winning season. So it'll be fun.
Oh, it's going to be a great time. And actually, the first FSU game I actually ever went to was the 2011 FSU-Oklahoma game actually at Doak Campbell Stadium when I was a student with the when E.J. Manuel was knocked out. Clint Strickland kind of brought us back into the game. But overall, I'm very excited for this game overall. But I do want to talk to you a little more about Oklahoma as a whole heading into this year because that was one of the teams where we saw basically randomly Brian Kelly left over at Notre Dame, and then Lincoln Riley, I think a few weeks later, left shortly after towards USC. And then you bring back Brent Venables. You start off as a top 10 team, ranked number 9, heading into your week 1 game against UTEP. So I wanted to ask overall, one, was that something that basically took your entire fan base off guard? And two, what were your expectations heading for Brent Venables into year 1?
Yeah, it was a shock. I mean, I know Josh was writing at Sooners Wire at the time. And I was out at the park with my kids on Sunday afternoon, the day after Bedlam. You know, there was some rumors swirling that Lincoln Riley was possibly leaving, but nothing that was finalized. And then, sometime in the afternoon, I think it was about 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it hit that I think it was Bruce Feldman was one of the first ones I saw reported from The Athletic that he was leaving. And I was just taken aback. I didn't know what to do. I was at the park with my kids, was not planning on writing that afternoon. And we just had to get after it because it was such a surprise. You know, there were rumors for weeks that he was going to be kind of entangled with the LSU job. There had been rumors for years that he'd be going to the NFL, places like the Dallas Cowboys, and always shot those down. Seemed like he was going to be an Oklahoma guy for life after Bob Stoops kind of handed him the team. And then he was just gone. And then it came out a little bit later that a report by the LA Times that his representation had been in talks with USC for months. And it just, I think it took the whole fan base by surprise and left us kind of wondering where we stood at the time. But, fast forward a year later, and I'll speak for myself in this, but I think we're still in really good shape moving forward.
Well, and I would just add to a lot of what John said there by saying this. Yes, there was a thought that maybe Lincoln Riley was looking at other jobs. There was this really strange day or sequencing of days to where Lincoln Riley had taken what is infamously now known in Norman as the personal day. And there was all this speculation of what's going on with that. Why did he take a personal day? It was right in the middle of Oklahoma's bye week during the 2021 season. And so lo and behold, you kind of start putting the puzzle pieces together later. Was that personal day an opportunity to talk to an LSU, a USC? Who knows? I don't know if that was pre-interview screening or what was going on, if it was really on the up and up that week, but it kind of dates all the way back to that for Oklahoma fans for just ultimately what wound up happening where he bolts and goes to USC. I think for OU fans and probably Florida State fans will relate to this because when you've had somebody like Bowden at Florida State, dating us back here a little bit, but when you have somebody like Bowden as a head coach that was the head coach that was the institution of Florida State for years and years and years, right? You kind of feel like, we're not going to get left at the altar. Our head coach isn't going to leave us for anything else out there because guess what? There's nothing better than Florida State out there. And really, for the history of Oklahoma football, You don't see head coaches leave the University of Oklahoma to go take on a different college job. So that was foreign to Oklahoma fans. And yeah, I mean, while there was some speculation here and there, ultimately, as John said, I mean, it was a shock to the system because you just don't see at OU college coaches leave for another college job, maybe an NFL gig, but not OU to go to USC. That had Oklahoma fans in a tizzy.
Yeah, about a second. It seems kind of like, in my personal opinion, not even a lateral move, kind of more of a downgrade, primarily because USC hasn't been that great of a program since, Pete Carroll was the head coach there, and you still didn't see the full commitment from the institution, basically to back up the full program after those sanctions and everything else. But let's move forward over to Mr. Brent Venables. He has a homecoming coming into the season. Josh, I do want to start with you with this question. Overall, it looks like a very uneven year from what I'm looking at. You start off with a 3-game winning streak, then you lose 3 games straight. Only you have that infamous, shutout, the blank 0 game against Texas, but then you have wins against a ranked Kansas, and also you win Bedlam against Oklahoma State. Overall, when you look at the season as a whole for the 2022 Oklahoma Sooners, what is the word or something a phrase you can kind of define how it's been the entire season?
Frustrating. Are you kidding me? It's Oklahoma football. They're 6-6. This isn't really acceptable at the University of Oklahoma. And if they lose to Florida State, it'll be the first losing season for Oklahoma since 1998. So really, from the moment Bob Stoops arrived forward up until now, there hasn't been a season like this. There's been some downer years here and there. The first year of Bob Stoops in 99, what did they finish, John? 7-5. And that was a success given how the 90s had played out for Oklahoma. And then there was, a couple of years that weren't all that great in between leading up to this one. 14 comes to mind where you had beaten Alabama in the Sugar Bowl the year before to end the season and came in with all the expectations and ended up losing 5 games. So all of which is to say, Oklahoma fans, they don't take very kindly to losing 6 football games, regardless of, hey, yeah, it's year 1 for Brent Venables and there's excitement here and there. It's been a frustrating year for Oklahoma fans, and it just hasn't measured up to the expectation that Sooner fans had coming into this thing. There is kind of, I think, a battle that John can speak to here that fans are sort of waging against one another, which is, hey, no, it's year 1. Be patient. This thing's going to get itself worked out. And then there's sort of the other faction of the fan base that's like, yeah, but you shouldn't be losing 6 games at the University of Oklahoma.
Yeah, inconsistent is the word I'd use to describe it, because you start off with 3 wins by at least 30 points or more. You cover in 2 of those 3. One of those, I think the spread was like 31.5 or something like that. And you barely missed the cover. And so you get off to this great start. The defense looks good. They're flying around. They're getting, splash plays, getting into the backfield. And then kind of the wheels fall off against Kansas State late. They had an opportunity to get the ball back in that game if they were able to get a defensive stop on a 3rd and 16, which is an obvious keeper play to Adrian Martinez, and nobody stays on the spy, and he just runs free for a big gain. Game over. And then TCU, you lose Dillon Gabriel to a hit that was really questionable, down, possibly dirty. Some people might call it.
That's a very nice way to put it, because that was pretty damn brutal, to be honest with you.
Try to be diplomatic a little bit.
You don't do that here, man. It's a safe space.
Yeah, there you go. So it was a rough hit, and he's knocked out of the rest of that game. TCU goes on to roll. I mean, TCU probably wins that game anyway, but I think the margin of victory is much closer because you have a quarterback that can actually throw the ball. And then you go into the Red River Showdown, and they don't trust Davis Bevel to throw it. It becomes really, really clear in that game that they don't trust him. And I think that was the biggest issue. They tried to run Wildcat as much as they possibly could, but they didn't have the horses to do it. And that Texas game, it's one that we talk about on the show as you just throw that tape out the window. You try to forget everything you can about that game, because none of it's going to translate. None of it's going to be, I mean, you can teach tape the defensive part of the game, but after about the first half, it's all a wash. It doesn't even matter anymore, because you're not getting anything offensively.
I mean, yeah, you look at that game and it kind of reminds me of the FSU Miami game from, I want to say, 2 seasons ago. That was during the COVID year, I think, where FSU lost. I think it was 50-10. And it's like, you watch the game, and I remember rewatching it for the pod, and I'm sitting there like, there's literally nothing I could take from this game, because anything that can go wrong did go wrong, but also you can just see how the culture of the team was vastly different than it is right now. And looking over these, the losses that you do have, you lost to a TCU team who is in the CFP, a Kansas State team who did win the Big 12, Baylor, very competitive team, you lost by a field goal. Same thing West Virginia, where West Virginia, that looks a little bit worse than it is. But overall, if you look at the games in totality, you guys should actually be probably close enough to being maybe an 8-win team, right?
I mean,
right, John?
Yeah, I mean, the issue is that they struggled in close games. You had 3 turnovers from Dillon Gabriel in the Baylor loss. The loss to West Virginia, you were pretty well in control of that game until the second half when Garrett Green and the Mountaineers just played keep away from your offense and just ran the ball at will against a defense that had been up and down all season long. And then the Texas Tech one is just, it's laughable. I mean, they had a 24-7 lead in the second quarter. We're absolutely dominating that game and then just let it get away from them. As soon as kind of bad things started happening, they weren't able to slow it down and then weren't able to make plays late in the game offensively to prevent it from going into overtime. And then they weren't able to get the touchdown in overtime and Tech or the field goal because we had a missed field goal in overtime, which just was one of those things that if anything can go wrong, it will in that game. And yeah. And so really that's what it was. It's just like 1 week you might get a really strong defensive performance for 3 quarters, but your offense doesn't show up. And finally by the fourth quarter, the defense has kind of left it all out on the field, played 100 plays and they don't have anything left by the end. And so I think it's a team that, Josh mentioned it, a program that doesn't lose 6 games. They don't win fewer than 7. You have to go back to Bob Stoops' first year to find the last time they lost or they won fewer than 8 games. So this is a team that is used to winning. It's a program that's built on consistent winning, even in down years. The Paul Thompson year in particular, they still won the Big 12 championship, even though they weren't their best. So this is a team and a program that's not used to anything like this. But like Josh said, I think there's reason to be patient. There's reason for optimism. And maybe we'll get into it, but just what Brent Venables and his staff have done on the recruiting trail gives you enough reason to be optimistic about the future of this program.
Okay, I will ask about that actually. But before we do that, Josh, I do want to ask you, because what John just said to me kind of reminds me of something we had to do as an FSU fan base with Mike Norvell under year 1, year 2, and now we're seeing the benefits in year 3. How has the OU fan base been able to basically, because the standard we always remains the same. The standard is the standard. FSU, OU, they're blue bloods for college football, but we always expect to be competing for the CFP or national championship. But how has OU fans been able to, I guess, temper expectations? Because in year 1, it is a year 1 new, first time head coach. While Brent Venables was a great DC, it was kind of he was very wary about what job he would take. And also, you guys did lose a lot of players to the transfer portal. I mean, basically, Lincoln Riley was like, hey, who wants to come with me? You lost a 5-star talent, a future first-round pick, and Caleb Williams. So how has the fan base been able to, I guess, temper expectations, or how have they been able to at all, period?
I think they've actually done a pretty good job of that in kind of giving Brent Venables grace. In fact, I mean, I mentioned the 2 factions earlier. You're kind of probably on one side or the other if you're an Oklahoma fan, but for those that aren't in the give Brent Venables more time, be more patient, you're almost maybe in the minority of the 2 sides of the thing, just because here's something I think you got to understand, and Florida State fans, if they're hearing this, probably should understand, is that, like, we've seen head coaches at other places have a bad first season, and then you kind of compound it with just the head coach is unlikable. Right. I think from an Oklahoma fan's perspective, you got Tom Herman doing the backpack deal versus Missouri, right, in a bowl game. I mean, there's not that with Brent Venables is what I'm getting at here. Brent Venables arrives in Norman, Oklahoma. He comes back, when he first left, he, defensively, there were some problems for Oklahoma. It was kind of, hey, let's bring Mike Stoops back and see if we can, reconjure up some of that magic we had in the early 2000s defensively. And Brent Venables came on a radio station that I work at now in Norman, Oklahoma, and in Oklahoma City. And he cried, man. He cried to be leaving Norman, Oklahoma. He didn't want to necessarily leave OU to go to Clemson, but it was the right career move at the right time. Boom, you fast forward to him being the guy that every Oklahoma fan wanted to be the head football coach at Oklahoma. And lo and behold, I guess what I'm getting at here is he gets maybe a little bit more grace than a lot of other guys maybe would get in this position, just because he was so well-liked. He is still so well-liked. People here in Norman, Oklahoma want him to win so bad. They want it to work out for him. So he is getting maybe a little bit more of a leash than somebody else perhaps would get.
I mean, less, but also like Brent Venables was defensive coordinator for a Clemson dynasty that won 2 national titles. I mean, you also get the grace for that. And he's someone that I can tell you right now, when we were hiring after Wood Taggart, I'm like, please just grab this man, find some way to bring him over. And now we get to see him on Thursday night. But let's go over to actually the X and O's for the game overall, because you guys did hire one of my favorite OCs, and Jeff Lebby, my little brother. He's a UCF alumni, so he's only been speaking praises about not only him, but also the transfer QB, Dillon Gabriel. Dillon Gabriel, he's playing in this game, right? Because remember, he got injured early in the year. He's come back. So I wanted to ask, how was the offense as a whole? Jeff Lebby been running it over at OU. How's it looked for the entire season?
Mostly good. Mostly good and mostly pretty good. It's mostly been one of the better offenses in the Big 12 and in the country. But again, we come back to that word inconsistent. Where they really struggled was on 3rd and 4th down, and they played for 4th down quite a bit this year. I've got my frustrations with the offense. I think they did a really, really good job of running the football and getting Eric Gray to 1,300 yards rushing. They had a true freshman that became the backup running back who had a really, really good year. An offensive line that had some questions going into the season. Again, had a great year running the ball. And I think in pass protection, they did pretty well as well. There are elements of Jeff Lebby's offense I'm not a big fan of, but all in all, I thought it was a really good first year for him with Dillon Gabriel. And, there are elements to Dillon Gabriel's game that I think could be better, but all in all, it was a good season. And if you look at it from a 10,000 foot perspective, I would like them to run less of the behind the line of scrimmage passing game that they love to run, but Jeff Lebby's not going to listen to me. He's not going to change up because he's had a lot of success doing what he's done. But I think there are elements to this game, this offense, that are really good. It's very explosive when they're hitting. I mean, there were several games where, if Dillon Gabriel and Marvin Mims connect down the field on a play that was either an overthrown or a dropped pass, it maybe changes the game. It maybe changes the outcome of that game. But there were I feel like every game there was at least one, if not multiple, misconnections, whether it was a drop pass or an overthrow on a deep ball that was a walk-in touchdown. And so I think people are really, really excited still about Jeff Lebby and about his future with Oklahoma. It's just an offense that needed to be better on 3rd down, needed to be better on 4th down. And in my opinion, quit playing for 3rd down, quit playing for 4th down, and attack the sticks a little bit more. But again, all in all, 10,000 foot view, really good offense, just more consistency, please.
And then, so I guess, Josh, my question for you is overall with that, because I do know you have several opt-outs. One of them is the Eric Gray kid that you mentioned. I think he had the 9th best rushing season in the history of Oklahoma for running back. Actually, this past season, you have 2 tackles that did leave. I think, Wanya Morris, and the other kid's name is escaping me. So I know Javante Barnes probably actually asked to do a little more mop-up duty for this game. So what are some names that FSU fans should probably be looking out for when it comes to the Oklahoma off Thursday?
Well, the other tackle, by the way, is Anton Harrison that would have been playing for Oklahoma, and it's substantial that they're not going to have either Wanya Morris or Anton Harrison playing in this game. A couple of NFL guys that the Sooners won't have. Now, they feel pretty good that Jacob Sexton is going to step right in and be a talented left tackle for them, either come as soon as Thursday night or beyond, right? I mean, this is somebody that is a true freshman, so that's pretty unique. That somebody, I think that's one of the kind of crazy parts of these bowl games now with the opt-outs in general is I think you're going to see more of this versus, the less of this that we saw in years past. So just from a how do they replace those guys standpoint, that's a name to keep an eye on. Just is he going to be able to hold up for Oklahoma at left tackle? That's a big if for somebody that really hadn't played a lot of college football. Tyler Guyton would be the other guy on the other side. Javante Barnes will get a heavy load at running back and has definitely been very much involved for Oklahoma throughout this season, no doubt. I mean, Eric Gray's clearly been the number one. Like you said, he's authored at a place like Oklahoma that's had a lot of running backs, author up some pretty doggone good seasons. He, kind of came into the season, and I'll raise my hand and say that I was part of this choir, this chorus that wasn't necessarily singing the Eric Gray praises coming into 2022, and he silenced a lot of that. So that's definitely a substantial loss for Oklahoma going into the game as well, though. I think Sooner fans are pretty excited to see Javante Barnes get a leading role, and we'll see beyond that what it looks like, whether it's Sawchuk or whoever the other running back is that's getting carries. I think for Sooner fans, it would ease a lot of their concerns too if they could see a Jaden Gibson at wide receiver or Nick Anderson, one of these young wideouts, go out and make plays in this game. They think the scuttlebutt is that Marvin Mims maybe is coming back to Norman, but obviously that's not been official. So, and that could change, right? If Marvin Mims goes out and drops a 200 receiving yard game and a couple of scores, we'll see if that impacts his decision. But those would be some names I think you got to keep an eye on.
I like that a lot. And also Javonte Barnes was someone that actually I was familiar with coming out of high school. That was one that Mike Norvell was recruiting, and I watched his tape. I'm like, this kid has a potential to be a very, very elite running back in college football. So I'm excited to see him actually again in person when I'm actually over there at the game. Now, defensively, Brent Venables, obviously, made his resume, made everything else, made his name through being in DC at OU, then being DC at Clemson. Before we go to X's and O's and how OU's defense has either improved or what's your opinion on that, how have you felt basically in the first year for Brent Venables? You've been able to kind of reshape the defense. And I want to start with you, Josh, since we had John go last time.
Well, obviously it's been disappointing defensively for Oklahoma. They, frankly, are one of the nation's worst in a lot of categories defensively. So I don't know. It's easy to just look at it and say they haven't been very good. There's reasons, I think, for some optimism when you think about somebody like a Danny Stutzman or Bowman is somebody in the secondary that Oklahoma fans are really excited about. So that's kind of where we're at with Oklahoma defensively. It's not just been, Oklahoma's been able to come up with stops in moments, but I go back to some of the games we were talking about earlier. And why is Oklahoma 6-6 coming into this game? Well, Oklahoma at West Virginia actually played a fantastic defensive first half, but then when push came to shove and it was winning time late, they couldn't get stops when it mattered. So that's kind of been the story of this team. And unfortunately, a lot of the failures have fallen at the feet of Oklahoma defensively. So I guess I would categorize it as there's been some nice individual performances for Oklahoma, but collectively, it just has not been very good.
So is that more basically the talent that actually is Oklahoma, actually right now on the defense side of the ball? Or do you think that's something that can get, I guess, be improved as Brent Venables is there? Because, John, as you mentioned earlier, that his recruiting has been off the charts. I think we saw, was it Peyton Bowman was the one that flipped on National Signing Day from 3,000 different other schools. I thought he was going to go somewhere else at the end of the day. But do you think that's something that you see that it's more proactive, basically, you need to wait and see when it comes to Brent Venables with his defense as we kind of bring his guys in?
Yeah, I think it's some of that, but I think also some of the failures this year were just strictly execution, tackling ability. There were several games where when the defense was playing well, they were tackling well. And when they weren't playing well, a lot of it was they weren't tackling well, especially at the end of that West Virginia game when, again, especially your linebackers, your Danny Stutzman, Deshaun White, David Agwebu, they've been on the field for 100 plays. Well, they're having a hard time tackling Garrett Green, who's not a big dude. He's not Adrian Martinez. He's more of the Max Duggan build, just not as fast as Max Duggan. So that's where a lot of it comes down to. And again, the quarterback run game has been an issue for Oklahoma all season long, which is going to be a big key to the Cheez-It Bowl against Jordan Travis, who's one of the better running quarterbacks in college football. How they are able to figure out a way to contain him, that'll be a huge part of this game. But it's execution, it's talent, it's depth. And I think the depth of talent is probably where the biggest issue lies, because when this team has been on the field for 100 plays, that's when the depth needs to be able to be relied upon and take over. Now they're building that depth, but it might still take a couple years to where they're at a point where it's like, okay, we got to pull Danny Stutzman, who's our best linebacker, arguably. We got a guy that we feel really good about and really confident in that's going to be able to go out there and make a tackle when it's a key play. They just didn't have that. They were basically three deep at linebacker after Ted Roof suffered his injury TD Roof, the son of Ted Roof, suffered his injury in the preseason. And then Shane Witter suffered a season-ending injury early on in the season as well. So they didn't trust some of their younger linebackers. And I think that's a big thing for Brent Venables and his defensive staff. They're not just going to throw true freshmen out there. They want to know that they're going to be able to rely upon those guys. And so that left them really, really light at linebacker this year. And so as they continue to build depth, that'll help. But again, some of it was just execution, and it wasn't always kind of late game execution. Sometimes it was early part of the season or early part of the game execution as well. So it's a little bit of both. It's both and. The players got to play better, and the talent has to get better. Now the talent is on the way. This signing class, they signed 16 blue chippers, and 10 of those were on the defensive side of the football. So that's a great start. 2 of your 3 5-star guys, defensive side of the ball. 7 of your 11, top 11 were defensive side of the ball. Couple that with their 2022 recruiting class that they put together in like 2 months. And again, another really solid defensive signing class. So it's coming, it's building. It just might take another class or two to get to the point where you're starting to really see Brent Venables, defense start to really take shape.
John, you must be a very patient man. Just the way you're just going on and on about it. Like you were there just for the long haul. I love to hear that. And also, I love the answer, like basically saying it's both. Like, we have a huge saying on here for the show, but say, ¿Por qué no los dos? Basically, why not both? So it's basically, what is it with this defense actually struggle with overall when it comes to basically facing opposing offenses? Whether it be, is it the run game is an issue, or is it the running quarterback? I know Jordan Travis, while he is a mobile quarterback, this year we actually have seen him more basically be the true pocket passer, passing for almost 23, 24 attempts per game, and not even relying on the legs as much. So what exactly is it for this FSU offense that they're able to look at and exploit when it comes to the Oklahoma defense?
Yeah, so it's, not just the read option game, but the quarterback scramble game, because there have been times where they have everything covered up, but they just take really bad angles in pursuit of the quarterback as he breaks the pocket. Against the traditional running game, they've played really well in the second half of the season. Aside from the Baylor game was they just dominated with one of the better offensive lines in the country. Baylor just was really, really good. But coverage has been an issue. And I think you see that reflected in this 2023 signing class where they signed 6 blue chip defensive backs. And so that's an area that has to improve for them too. So it's every level. There were games where they struggled to get a pass rush. And so that adds to their struggles in coverage. But there were games where, the quarterback was, hitting guys in under 2.5 seconds, which is not on the pass rush. That's on coverage. So it's, again, both. And it's a little bit of everything that Oklahoma struggled with at times.
Okay, so then, Josh, I already asked you the same question regarding offensively. What are names we have to look out for? I know we have players like Ethan Downs or John Lalu, Billy Bowman, other players as well. What are players that I guess that don't get the kind of the name recognition, but are names that you were going to hearing a lot of on Thursday afternoon?
Well, I think in that department, R. Mason Thomas would be a name to keep an eye on. He's a true freshman when you kind of look across the board. That's really, for Oklahoma fans, that's really what this game is about, right? Look, they'd love to avoid the losing season for the first time since '98. And, as a fan, you want to win every game, right? You're not trying to root for a team or watch a team that's losing football games. You want to win every single one. But for Oklahoma fans, the most important thing would be that underclassmen play well in the game, right? That just across the board, offense, defense, that's been one of the driving pieces of conversation in Norman and Oklahoma City, Tulsa for Sooner Nation. Young guys play well. R. Mason Thomas would fit that bill. Danny Stutzman, Billy Bowman, some of those names that we've talked about. If they could get, a surprise from, we haven't really seen a lot of a Grayson Halton up front. That would be nice. Kelvin Gilliam is a name that, again, we haven't really seen a lot of. So any defensive linemen that are younger guys that could rush Jordan Travis a little bit in this game and maybe actually do some positive things would be a very, very welcome sight for Oklahoma. Kip Lewis, linebacker, is, I want to say he's listed second on the depth chart right now at one of the linebacker spots. So that would be another young guy that Oklahoma fans, we really haven't seen a lot of. There's so much excitement for a kid named Jaron Kanik, who initially was going to go to Clemson, and then obviously Brent Venables took the job at Oklahoma. And basically the recruitment story, I'll be short-winded here, not long-winded. Basically, Jaron Kanik said, I'm not going anywhere other than where Brent Venables is at, and he came to Oklahoma, even though Brent Venables said, yeah, we don't have a scholarship for you. He came anyway. So he's a fan favorite. Just anybody that's an underclassman for Oklahoma, offensively or defensively.
Okay, also Kip Lewis, that's a great name for a linebacker. But overall, it seems to me I think one of the things that we've been talking about a lot, actually, for the show, all last week and the week before, was that it seems to me that for this game, Oklahoma has everything to gain. FSU has everything to lose when it comes to momentum and kind of perception heading in next season. FSU has a 4-game winning streak, potentially could be ranked towards top 10, maybe even break that. Heading into the LSU game opening weekend. Oklahoma, 6-6 kind of game, but overall, you're seeing players still are really attracted to it. You did have great high school flips. You also transfer-wise are doing well in the portal. So is that the same feeling over there? Basically, you're just playing with nothing left to lose. You can play a little more reckless abandonment when it comes to this game on Thursday?
I really do think that's the case. And I think, many people expected, Oklahoma's recruiting to fall off the table when Brent Venables was hired. Again, he put together the number 8 recruiting class in the country in just 2 months in the 2022 cycle. Last May and June, people were wondering, okay, is Oklahoma's recruiting finished? Then they put together a July and August that was just off the charts. They finished with the number 5 class in the 2023 cycle. Again, flipping a guy like Peyton Bowen. So, and then, as you mentioned, in the transfer portal, doing fantastic. They brought back, a former Sooner favorite, Austin Stogner from South Carolina. They brought in Deshaun McCullough from Indiana, a really highly regarded edge player. Added Reggie Pearson from Texas Tech, a big hitter. So there's a lot of, and then Jacob Lacey out of Notre Dame. So a lot of really interesting things happening for the Sooners. And I think they still have a lot of positive momentum, regardless of how the season's finished. And I think even if they lose this game, people will still feel really good about the future of the program, and it won't hurt, because what we've seen that Brent Venables and his staff can do is recruit. And I don't think that's going to change. And I think eventually this is going to turn into a winning football team again, one that's contending for conference championships, whether it's in the Big 12 or the SEC, or contending for a college football playoff berth, whether it's in the Big 12 or the SEC, because they're going to begin to stockpile all that talent, and eventually it's going to come together. It's going to. And Brent Venables is, and I think the reason, everybody kind of bought into the idea that Brent Venables could win in year one was because of who Brent Venables is. He's a guy that kind of rallies the troops. He rallied the fan base. He rallied the donor base. He rallied the university. Everybody bought into what he was selling. It's just the talent's just not there yet, but it will be there. It's coming. It's on the way. There are some talented kids in Norman right now. Some of them are sophomores. Some of them are first-year starters, like a Danny Stutzman and Ethan Downs, a Billy Bowman. Those 3 guys were making their first starts in Norman this year. They played a little bit as true freshmen, but really took over as sophomores. So still a lot of really positive vibes. Oklahoma is on the up and up. Things are going great. Win or lose this game, positive vibes only.
All right, then, before we get to predictions, I kind of can tell already where John is feeling about Brent Venables. Josh, I'm going to ask you the same question, but I kind of want to ask you a little different spin on it. And it's that Oklahoma is going to the SEC in 2 years now, I think is what everyone's been talking about overall. Do you think Brent Venables is going to be that coach actually bring you success when you make that move to the SEC? Because that's a whole entirely different animal than Big 12.
I think so. I'm going to remain on the optimistic side, and I do think that Oklahoma, just generally speaking, would have had plenty of success the last, since Bob Stoops arrived in the SEC. I do think that we get caught up a little bit at times. And look, I'm excited, man. I'm as thrilled as anybody that Oklahoma's going to get to play Florida and LSU, and they'll reunite with A&M, just on and on and on. We've talked, John and I, ad nauseum, Oklahoma fans have, just the excitement, right? It's more exciting than welcoming in Kansas, or with all due respect to what the Jayhawks all of a sudden are revitalizing themselves into the Iowa States and Texas Techs of the world. There's a little more juice, right, behind Oklahoma, Bama, and OU, Georgia, and OU, Arkansas, on and on and on. You get the drill. I do think Oklahoma probably would have been largely successful over the last quarter century in the SEC, just even as currently constructed, right? With the bad defenses and all, they still would have won a lot of football games in the SEC. So I don't think that's magically going to change right now for Oklahoma, though the plan for Brent Venables is to get better defensively, which year one would tell you, not necessarily happening just yet. But I do still believe that he and Bates and just this entire coaching staff for Oklahoma is going to do that. And the way that he's recruiting, man, the end that they had to last year's class and the flip of Bowen just kind of highlights Oklahoma's heading in that direction where they are getting more talented. And it's just going to take a little bit of time, and people got to be patient with that, which Oklahoma fans not used to being patient, right? Not used to being patient in that regard.
No college football fan base is patient, man. Not at all. I wanted Mike Norvell fired after the first year. I was like, I'm just done with this. But now, listen, patience is a virtue, and I love how you're basically showing off. You're not afraid in a big bad face of the SEC, because, quite frankly, parity is coming a lot stronger with college football, especially with NIL and the transfer portal. So now, prediction time. Josh, you go first. How is this game playing out?
Well, I like Florida State to win the game because I've seen too many games of Oklahoma playing this season. I'm not predicting Oklahoma to beat a good team right now in 2022. Hope I'm wrong. Would love to see Oklahoma, from a momentum standpoint, win this game and finish with a winning record and avoid the first losing season since '98. But kind of as we discussed, ultimately they got the top 5 signing class, and that's probably more important anyways. And maybe it's a show for another day, the just importance of bowl games that aren't the college football playoff in general, because John can attest to it. We saw the Valero Alamo Bowl last season for Oklahoma. There are a bunch of great performances, and I got news for you. None of it translated to 2022. So, look, I'd love to see Oklahoma win the game. Ultimately, defensively, I just don't know that OU's turned that corner yet. I do. We've kind of been having a little debate, this Florida State team, where are they at? Where would they have finished in the Big 12? Is this a team, you see Jordan Travis on those Heisman hopeful list entering next season? I do buy the Travis stock. I think Florida State's on the up and up. I buy into it. I think this is a very good opponent that Oklahoma's meeting in this game. And I don't pick Oklahoma to slow them down a whole heck of a lot. So I do think OU shows up and is competitive. I don't think we see a house of cards that falls in on itself in Oklahoma in this game. I do buy into Ethan Downs and some of the guys that are talking for OU, selling the narrative that, hey, we got a lot to play for. And, this is about the reputation of the program, on and on and on. Ultimately, man, I just don't think they're as good as Florida State. So I'm going to take Florida State 37, Oklahoma 27, somewhere in that ballpark.
Oh, so you missed the cover by a hook. Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. I think right now it's at 9.5 from our friends over at Bet Online. John, your thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to actually mention the line and say I do like Oklahoma to cover. I just don't like them to win outright. Dillon Gabriel, when he's been healthy for a full 4 quarters, this team plays close games. Every loss you look at in which Dillon Gabriel played a full 4th quarter, it was a 1-score loss. So I like Oklahoma to at least keep it close. The key matchup is going to be Jacob Sexton over there at left tackle against Jared Verse. Like, Jared Verse is getting some top 15 buzz in NFL draft circles right now. And that's going to be quite the baptism for our guy that's a 4-star offensive tackle, making his first start as a true freshman in a bowl game. It's crazy to think that that's going to be his first opportunity to play, but it's going to be great opportunity for him to kind of learn, by fire. There's nothing like experience to teach you. And so I think that's going to be a great opportunity for him. And that's really going to be what it comes down to, is how well Oklahoma is able to block, the Florida State defensive line. Again, Jared Verse is great. They've got a lot of really good guys up front as well. It's a top 20 defense and a top 20 offense against Oklahoma, who's got one of the better offenses, but also a terrible defense. So I like Florida State to win it, unfortunately, but I also think Oklahoma does enough offensively to cover it.
Obviously, I kind of like that overall. I mean, I'll be giving my pick on one of our shows for preview the day of the game, but gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today, because I've actually never been able to speak to an Oklahoma fan. My roommate at law school was an Oklahoma State fan, so there's kind of nice to get a little bit different perspective. So please let the folks know where they can follow you and follow your work.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. The show is at Locked On Sooners. You can also read my stuff over at Sooners Wire. We got some good coverage coming up for the bowl game.
At Josh on Ref on Twitter for me, and obviously Locked On Sooners, where you should be following along with John and I every single day. And, just plug for you, Locked On Seminoles, your team every single day. Radio side, you can tune into me, KREF. So just download our free app. But thanks for having us, man. It's been a blast. Everybody enjoy the football. It's the last time we get to do this season. So for better or for worse, let's just enjoy it, all right?
Hey, for better or for worse, but also, the last losing season you did was 98, but that was Bopsu's first year. So maybe Brent Venables' first losing season could be a harbinger for, nicer things to come. Could have another Bopsu actually on your hands. But gentlemen, thanks for joining me today. That was John. That was Josh. This is Drake. And we'll see y'all next time on Locked On Seminoles. Take care, everybody.